use one or two of these styles the most, and that one or two of these styles might be an easier factory setting or a really trickier one for you to deal with, okay? So the next thing is we're going to look at these little animals and what all these things mean, because my previous slide, it's so boring and I got sick of showing it, and then I thought, well, how about animals? Animals are fun. So there's no judgment on any of these styles at all. The shark aligns with the competing style, and this is, when we're thinking about interpersonal conflict resolution, the shark is looking at win-win. The shark is looking at, I am right, I am winning and you are losing. And that's what Thomas and Kilman called the competing style. Any sharks swimming around here? So this is new for 2025, you get a little trading card. And just, again, to mention, all of these styles might be the right style depending on the situation that you're facing. There's no better or worse style. The idea here is to illustrate that people have different approaches to conflict, that we might engage with this in a variety of ways. Then next we have the owl. And the owl is the collaborating style. Owls, who are you? Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm here all night. So if you're an owl, we got a card for you. And the owl is looking to understand the deeper needs behind their counterparts' demands and to express their own needs. Owls see value in working through strong emotions and propose trade-offs across issues to give each side more of what they want, and that's in contrast of the shark, who's not necessarily as concerned with making sure that each party is walking away satisfied. Okay? Next we have a turtle, and these are the avoiders. And the turtle tends to skirt around conflict. They are trying to avoid that discomfort of conflict. It can be effective in the short term, like we talked about, but it can make long-term problems a little bit worse. Turtles, don't be afraid to stick your head out of your shells. It's a very common style. And do you have another turtle? Yeah. And I hope I have enough, because doing the math on this is a real challenge for a communication person, right? 5 styles, who knows how many people? I don't know. Next we got a teddy bear. I need to put a Missouri State bear here, but I don't have one yet. This is the accommodating style, and this is that person who's always going to put the needs of the other person first, and they will put their needs second. And this can, again, work in the short term. And teddy bears can seem really agreeable and easygoing, but when you ignore your own needs over time, that can lead you, again, to some new conflicts. So teddy bears, you're also a teddy bear. Okay, that's fine. Some people have a couple dominant styles. Totally fair. And so you're also a teddy bear, Bruce? So you get 2 trading cards. I don't know what that says, but that's great. And then in the middle, we've got the fox. This is the compromising style. And this is a style that will allow both parties to lose and win. And they will compromise just to move forward, to get us out of this stuck spot. But again, this may not address the root issues. So over time, like avoiding, also might not work long term. So each of these styles has things to recommend it, pros and cons. So have you done this before? Is this something that any of you, you've taken this before?
Yeah, I took negotiation and conflict resolution last semester.
Okay, there you go. So you know all about the TK. Anything you want to say about it? What am I missing? What am I getting wrong?
It's all about right.
Appreciate it. Okay, but the animals, is that anything?
That's new.
Okay, yeah. That's new for 2025. Yeah, I've been teaching this for a long time, and I just needed to switch things up a little bit, so I added the animals.
Do foxes get trading cards?
Yeah, they're fox cards. Foxes. Sorry, I didn't make that clear enough.
So is there, it seems like you're only differing points.
Yeah, then you're both.
And does that mean that you don't have a style?
No, it means that you're toggling back and forth.
It's a balance, that's what I was wondering, because I'm like, I'm like,
Okay.
two different styles, because it depends
It depends.
on the conflict. So, you know, it just is freaking me out, because I'm a turtle too, I just gotta say it, I'm a turtle too, because it does depend on, you know, why don't I just get all the cards? I like all the cards. I like a full deck.
And that's okay.
Because I've been accused of not having a full deck, I might as well.
This is why we talk about it, and I don't know about I'm interested in your take on it since you just had it in the class recently. But the way I like to think about this, sort of like that conflict definition, as a way for us to get our arms around something, to manage this in a way that we don't necessarily have otherwise, because it wasn't necessarily obvious to me that people had different conflict styles. Because I just thought the way I looked at conflict, you know, the right way, was how everyone else would look at it. And then I'm also a Clifton strengths person, so I've gone through that Gallup training, and so that has shown me very clearly that the things that seem really evident to me, people see them other ways because they're different. Who knew?
Because they're wrong.
Well, I'm not saying they're not wrong sometimes. But
I'm not saying it's not wrong.
well, but I mean, I live with someone who's got very different strengths from me, very different. And I thought they were just being a jerk. Turns out they're being themselves. It's weird. It's really weird. And as a team, we're much stronger having different kinds of strengths than we are if we had the exact same strengths. And frankly, there are 34 themes in the Clifton. I'm not going too far down this road, don't worry, but I do think it has some connections to conflict. But so I'm married to someone with a number 1 that is number 33 out of 34 for me. And so we just look at situations very differently. So I don't have strength in that problem-solving, troubleshooting area that they do, and we just manage challenges differently. So it's everything that I can take like this helps me understand my own stuff better. So that's why I think it's interesting to take, personally. But I'm curious about what you're thinking about this, and your style and other people's styles.
Fantastic, and should be taught in elementary school.
Thank you, I think so too.
But you may not be able to answer those questions in
Well-
elementary school.
No, hmm?
You may not be able to answer those questions in elementary school.
No, well, the questions would need to be different in elementary school, I think. But I do think that human beings generally need to understand some of the power and the edge that they have in terms of communication, right? That the choices that we make communicatively can change our trajectories, right? And I do feel like kids need to know that. I mean, I tried to do that with the only 2 humans that I was responsible for. And they turned out, they're perfect. So you can text them and ask them. They'll tell you they're perfect too. But when I first did this, my sister did this, and my sister's gone through all of our conflict training as well, and she's got a master's in counseling. So she uses this same material every day in her job and in her life. So we're starting with ourselves. And then we need to think about what are our stories, right? What's important to us? What do we need to surface? What is so important that we need to talk about it? And we need to think about how we're telling our stories. Because sometimes we want to set ourselves up as the villain, or the victim, the other people as the villain and ourselves as the victim. And that, again, can meet some of our needs, but possibly doesn't move us towards some conflict resolution and dealing with the conflict. But that pointing outward is not usually that helpful. Sometimes people have wronged us grievously, and it's important to point that out, to, in a safe way, address that. I'm not saying that that needs to be ignored, but depending on the situation, not everything is very dramatic, and we just need to work through these things and take our responsibility where we need to, and not just assume that it's everybody else. That's being us council.
I have a comment on that as it
Okay.
relates to a lot of us who are here representing neighborhoods.
Yeah,
I find that in public policy, I don't really get into the weeds. Like, I've been in my neighborhood, I'm in University Heights, for 6 years. I've been on a board for 5 of those 6. I've never had a conflict with them. I don't really see our group having conflicts on anything mundane. I mean, maybe there is, but I've never seen it or really gotten involved in it. But we have, what probably quite a few people in this room are aware of, we do have a big public policy issue.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
according to city council and staff, a landmark issue, because we're the last historic neighborhood that doesn't have commercial development in its original interior perimeter. So I find that when we get into big issues like that, sort of like, and not to be political, but if you think of like government right now at the federal level, sometimes you have rather villainous elements that are legitimately there, that are so much bigger than, an ice cream social or a
Right.
4th of July party.
Yep.
Or, I mean,
Yep,
you have
absolutely.
really, really big things, and you have massive power disparities. It doesn't matter how great a communicator you are, that's my background also. It doesn't matter how ethical you are, what a great compromiser you are as a representative of one of the organizations. You have players thinking of our city government, where I've been involved in working with our city government for decades, and we have a lot of problems that are systemic to our city government that keep rearing their head, and it's finally hit our neighborhood. We're the last holdout, but that's where it's probably unique. I think it's a unique challenge for me. It's not a unique challenge for us as American citizens, because most of us, if our party isn't in the White House, it isn't, if they aren't in the executive branch, then we're used to having like big villains in our mind. But this is the first time I think it's hit me on a kind of a personal level, and there are just massive power disparities, and I find that a new territory.
Yeah, we can't ever talk about conflict without talking about power, and I am going to talk about power currencies here in a minute, because power currencies and different forms of power are always things that we need to reckon with. We are all dealing with these systems in which we're embedded. I mean, I work for a big university, so I have a lot of awareness of that particular system, but that's not the only system I'm moving in, because I'm, again, U.S. citizen, right? I live in the state of Missouri, so there are lots of other systemic, structural, communicative bodies that I'm involved in. And a lot of those things, we don't necessarily have a lot of control over those things. They're exogenous to us. But that, I think, is really what's powerful about working in our communities and knowing our neighbors. So I do totally commend everyone who's involved in this work. I know that it's important, and it can be very transformational. So honestly, I mean, this is a great structure, but yeah, definitely everybody in here, it's a little guy thing connected to a lot of other big power structures and public policy. But I mean, and I always say this in my classes too, we've got lots more responsibilities than just going and voting on election day as citizens. And when I ask groups of students, who's your state representative, they don't know. They won't raise their hand, and they should know not only their state representative, their city council member, and candidly, not only students have those gaps. And I don't think people in this room, because you've gotten to this room, so you don't have those gaps, but you are interacting with a lot of people who do. And then there's no resolution to that. That was not very satisfying, I'm sure, but that is the world we live in. We've got to pay attention to those systems and those power structures. and understand it as well as we can, right? So there are villains and there are victims, no question. In an interpersonal exchange, we need to be really careful about characterizing people's behaviors and actions in that simplistic fashion. We always need to focus on the behavior. Like I said, all behavior is communication, and not necessarily the story that someone is telling or that we're telling ourselves about the story. Because we're fabulous as humans, and we can tell ourselves all sorts of things, and other people can do that too. So I like to focus on the behavior, right? And those of you who've raised other people in the room, you know what that's like. Thinking about what the rest of the story might be, what might explain the behavior of the person who has some minor or major disruptive qualities when your group is gathered, right? What might explain that? Ways to mitigate that, we've talked about, and we'll talk a little bit more about. Think about what people might really want, and obviously the easiest way is to ask them what they really want. I've noticed this. I'm wondering about that. Explain this to me. Help me understand is a really good STEM kind of a sentence. Help me understand X or Y. And then there's some more of these kinds of tips that'll come up in the next few slides. One thing that has been coming into a lot of conflict work that we're doing and it's been around for a long time, but there's new research all the time now about EQ and emotional granularity. And there's fascinating research that shows that the more precisely we are able to describe our emotional landscape, the healthier our approaches to different kinds of challenges. And also there's some benefit even in physical health in terms of that emotional granularity. So our ability to say, I'm annoyed, instead of saying I'm furious, if you really are annoyed and not furious, you can say that. Just to find that, right, like what Mark Twain said, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between the lightning and the lightning bug. So we're looking for what is the right word, right? What is really going to describe ourselves? So that's why it's really important for us to frame up our own stories and have a lot of clarity about that, and think about our emotional landscape going into possibly a dealing with a conflict situation. This is where I think neighborhoods and neighborhood leaders, like you all are, have some powerful roles here. Where's that common ground? I mean, quite literally, we live on a couple blocks away from each other. We have very tangible common ground, right? What goals do we share? What do we want on the other side of this? That thinking about, once we've sorted out that victim-villain stuff, now what? What's next? If you have an understanding of how you engage with conflict, whether you're teddy bear, turtle, fox, anything, then you can start to engage with that conflict a little bit more constructively. So these are just some questions that you might want to ask in terms of mastering your stories. You mentioned values earlier, and so this is one of the illustrations that we sometimes use. Usually that center, right? That's our needs. A lot of times based on our values, we absolutely have to have that. That is non-negotiable. So we are very closely protective of that. That's the hardest to get to, hardest to change. The interests, what we really want, that's that next layer out there. And then our positions, what we say we want. But here's where I think we need to have our own story straight and really be clear about what is right there at the center, what's really motivating us. What are our values? Because unless we're clear about that, we could have a lot of additional conflicts that really don't necessarily need to happen, right? That we've got to have that clarity, and we're really the only ones who would know that. Then we think about these, I mentioned that we're going to talk about some communication patterns that sometimes made conflict a little trickier, different ways of communicating. when we look at culture, for example, some people are very direct in their communication, others are very indirect. There's the difference culturally, so a guy named Geert Hofstede, the Dutch guy, sorry I have to bring in the Dutch over and over again, but he came up with these different cultural dimensions, and high and low context cultures are something that he's discovered. And so there are these different cultural aspects. Some cultures are very collectivistic. We are in measurably the most individualistic country on earth. You can test that out. So that is going to be suffused through all of our communication patterns. But then we also came through different kinds of cultures in our families of origin, our family of creation, that also influence us in terms of how indirect or direct you're going to be. And you may have one of those styles that feels really natural to you and comfortable, and the other one may really bug you. It may really trigger you, right? Some of us like to think we're very objective, or we have training that conditions us towards some neutrality and objectivity, which humans can't be truly objective and neutral, but we can develop some of those skills, and others of us are really dealing with everything on a very emotional level, but we are always all of that. Humans are inherently emotional, and we've got to reckon with that other humans will be as well. Then there's the way we think. Some people think in a very linear fashion and maybe speak in that way. Others will speak in a more circular fashion, right? A little more indirect. We can also sometimes feel personally powerless, or we're interacting with someone who feels powerless. Again, back to Dr. Brown. Brene Brown says that this culture has a really weird feeling about power, that we disparage it in some ways, we exalt it in other ways, but to feel empowered is a really great feeling, and a really terrible feeling is to feel powerless. And there again, we need to know where we are. It can feel really powerless to go against some of those bigger structures where we don't see that we can make the impact, but it's very empowering to get to know your neighbors, right? And have those relationships. Clarity, I've already talked about that. And Brene Brown, she says, clarity is kind. And that we've got to be clear about our own stories that we're telling ourselves, and then we can tell those to other people. Feeling unheard can also be a trigger. You talked about that earlier, how the importance of people being heard and finding that listening ear. Do you have others? I mean, this is not exhaustive, but these are some of the biggies that we see over and over again in the research in terms of what people are talking about when they're talking about conflict. Does this cover a lot of that waterfront, you think? Yeah. So mastering your own stories means, Gesundheit, we're thinking about what your power is in a particular situation. That's also always going to depend. What forms of power do I have in this particular relationship? What forms of power maybe do I need to increase? So there's an acronym here that can help us remember that, and it's RICE. Those are our power currencies, is what the research calls these components. That interpersonally, or we control some resources, Gesundheit. We have some connections to other people. Communication skills, which I think can always be improved across the lifespan. I'm certainly still working on mine. And then our expertise, our skills, our special knowledge, the knowledge that you all bring around your area, the history is extremely powerful here, even when you're interacting with other people of different forms of power. Then we think about power. Some people have legitimate power because they have been elected or appointed to positions, right? They have expert power because they have specialized training. They have referent power because they're famous a lot of times. Those are people who show up in ads, right? There are also people who have coercive power over us. They have the power to withhold something from us. So we need to be really clear about what power looks like in its various dimensions. And not acknowledging that or understanding it can be a problem as well. and lead to deepening conflict instead and exacerbating it instead of making it, moving us to a point where we can resolve it. So the next thing you would do if you are thinking about this potential conflict or working through conflict is, where are you going to talk about this with the other person? So at this point, you've figured out your own side, what you need, your story, and then you are going to express to another person or persons what you need them to know. Okay, so that's where we are now. That establish a place to talk, that one on the right. It's always best to talk in person and talk in private. Students hate this part because they definitely would rather text this whole deal out. But how well does that work, right? Texting is a particularly lean channel of communication. It involves very few of our senses. The most tiring and difficult and best way for humans to interact with each other is still the old-timey face-to-face way. And it engages all of our senses, and if it tires you out, that's because it's tiring, right? That we can hear the other person's tone of voice, we can watch their micro-momentary expressions. Our faces are capable of making at least 250,000 facial expressions. And the way that we catch those from other people is usually face-to-face. And again, it's tiring. But we can see other people's eye movements. That's called oculesics. We're always communicating through our eyes and our faces, obviously. And face-to-face is the best way to do that. We also need to think ahead about how we can manage the interaction. Respecting the other person is something that I feel like you all are really locked in on, and you've talked about that. But that idea of acknowledging our own contribution, even if we don't see that, that's a part of our stories that we need to get right ahead of time. Because if you're right all the time, as you are, David, that's a struggle, right?
Yes.
I'm sure.
Thank you for acknowledging.
Okay, of course. I knew you were right about it. But you can talk about how important that relationship is to you, and maybe they perceive something that didn't happen, wasn't there. That's okay too, but you need to have the time and the space to work on this. And then finding that common ground, and that is where you explore, is this relationship important to both of you? And it's not always, I get that, but this is that notion of interdependency. What are we depending on each other for, okay? So obviously these are steps that are tiring when they're done well, but they're not about communicating perfectly, they're about communicating competently. And competent communication just means being effective and appropriate, which sounds so simple, but effective and appropriate moves you through some of those it depends situations, right? If you think about what's effective, what's appropriate in these different kinds of contexts. So here's another acronym. So I gave you RICE, and now this one is STATE. So each of these can give you a step to move forward in engaging with the other person. The stating, the sharing your facts is all about being brief and not blaming, which is a really hard thing for humans to not blame. Feelings are fine for us to describe our own feelings, and then the effect of whatever the situation is on us, we can flesh all that out for the other person, but we need to describe that honestly for them, and again, not in a blaming way. So we're sharing our facts and our story, but then those important features need to be listened to for the other person. Just as crucial that they have a chance to tell their story or stories, where they're coming from. Talking tentatively is not always easy in a culture like this. It is, like I said, highly individualistic, and we have a lot of value in the United States in being right. Celeste Headley is a journalist and author, and she says the hardest 3 words in the English language are "I don't know." She's got a great book called We Need to Talk, by the way. I really love her work. And she's got a lot of great communication tips as someone who's been doing it for a long time. But she says, and the research says, that sometimes we need to be able to talk tentatively and say, I don't know, but, or I think that, and that can be a challenge for us. And then encouraged testing means we're asking for them, what do you think? How did this affect you? What was your takeaway from this situation? Whatever that sounds like in this context. Does that make sense? So just another acronym that can help us move through some of these challenging situations. And so here's just an image that I really always like. This is based on a poem from the 19th century by John Godfrey Saxon. So it comes from a very, very old story about the blind man and the elephant. And so every person is at a different place on the elephant, and so they all are having a different experience. They think they're holding onto a tree or a rope or a sail or a wall, but it's all an elephant. They just don't know that. And so we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes in class I'll say, well, we only know our own part of the elephant, right? And that's something that we can think about productively when we're considering conflict. So state your view. Here just will highlight some of the reasons for this, or I've got some questions for you. So starting with the facts, this is not the point where we're interpreting things. We're just the facts. Some of you remember that line, right? When we are when we're in the story part, then we're moving into interpretation. And that's where it's really important and powerful to use I statements and I language. I feel when blank occurs because of blank, what I need is blank, we fill those in. What I need, we're taking ownership of our emotions, which again, weirdly, we're in this super individualistic culture, but we're not always good at this I language thing. When you say the word you, that does something to us, right? When we hear it, and it does something to the other person too. So that I language is really powerful. None of this is the end all be all, and it won't solve the person who is dead set on being a total jerk here, right? That's not a good use of your time. But if this is someone with whom you've got a relationship that needs to be managed, then this can be a fruitful strategy. So the next thing we think about is when we're encouraging them to share their facts and their stories. What's your experience? What do you think about this? If you express that you want to hear their perspective, that can be really powerful. That willingness to listen might be the first time they've really felt heard or listened to that day or that week. And that can unlock some things communicatively. So I'd encourage you to do that. This can be challenging to talk tentatively, like I said, because culturally, there's a lot of certitude in standard US culture, where we're positive about certain things, right? Having that open mind, being willing to accept another perspective, like you said, that might shift our expectations on the other side. That's okay. This is your story, not necessarily a fact, right? We're just feeling out what the other person has to say. And then finally, that encouraged testing. We can test our perspective and test our reaction to them. And sometimes we want another person involved. Sometimes another couple of people could share their perspectives. And then that could potentially move us productively along, because this constructive engagement with conflict is what we're looking for here. So which of these things, I'll just go back one time, which of these seem easy or low impact for you? Which of these might be a little bit harder for you? Now I feel like the eye doctor, that's how my eye doctor does it. Better or worse? Which of those feels pretty natural? Oh yeah, I do that already. And which of those you're thinking, oh Nora,
If you're talking about in a group setting, I suppose what would be more uncomfortable, yes, would be, for me, I mean, you know, if I think, and I use this statement if I am in the thought that I have a correct assumption of the situation, and then all of a sudden, oh, there it is, and I'm sitting there going, oh. So, that, the uncomfortable
Yep.
of bringing it out and then having to put it back in my pocket,
Yep.
I guess.
It
basically.
is uncomfortable.
You know, but sometimes you just gotta do it, I guess.
Well, and on the other side of that, the research shows that you'll have a stronger connection
Yeah,
with that person
for trying at least to,
Yep.
you know.
to work
resolve
through
it or
conflict.
Work through it, yeah.
Mhm. That's what every bit of the research shows.
Okay.
So that's what I like to bring in is really practical, keep it practical and doable. That's what I'm interested in.
At least attempt
Exactly.
instead of just say, well, okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
See you later.
So if we can do these things, then the research shows that we can move through conflicts. These can be challenging to execute. So there's a whole literature on, and we teach undergraduate and graduate level classes in small group communication, and lots of your groups that you are here representing function as, or they are small groups. So a small group is any group that's between 3 and 20, and 2 people talking to each other, up to 3 people talking to each other, that's interpersonal communication. Once we get 3 to 20, that's small group communication.
Okay.
And small groups have specific phases that they go through. And there's an easy way to remember this, and I didn't bring in a slide for this, but this is bonus material, no extra charge for this, right? But when groups first get together, they're forming, storming, norming, performing, and then at the end they adjourn, they break up because they do other things. But that is classically how groups operate. So a lot of times in a newer group, it's a little bumpier, and then once those norms are established, it settles down a little bit. But you get a new person, a new couple people in the group, even if the group has been established, it's still a new group. Justice Breyer, who retired from the Supreme Court, 9 members of the Supreme Court right now, and Justice Breyer said every member of the Supreme Court changed the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is a classic small group. So new members put you back in that forming stage again, can put you back in the storming stage, back in the norming, then performing. Again, can be a little tiring, but is an explanatory framework to think about conflict and some of our challenges with conflict, potentially. But these are just some of the ways that are based in the research that we can mitigate conflict and deal with conflict. And there are probably some of these that you all have tried and are working on. But here again, we've got to be aware of ourselves and our ability to manage any situation is always going to be affected by our emotional states. And overload is a real thing. We get emotionally overloaded, we get emotionally flooded, and our abilities to interact in that moment are going to be affected by that, right? And this is where I always, like I said, like to talk about the Gottman's research, but they've got a new book called Fight Right, and I'm pretty sure it's in this library system. I've had it already at my house. It's very good. Their couples research maps on beautifully to all sorts of other kinds of conflict, and this is what they study is conflict, mainly in couples. They have a very high ability to predict when couples are going to persist versus when they will not, based on some of the behaviors they've seen over their decades of research in their labs. So they have found over and over again that taking that break just is a circuit breaker, changes our channel, close out some tabs in your head, open up some different tabs in your head, really powerful and based in the research. So a 20-minute break and your ability to express, I need a 20-minute break, also helps you, is what their research shows. So I think that's pretty interesting. So here I've got some questions for all of y'all. We've been talking about conflict for a little bit. So what conflicts have you handled well? You don't necessarily have to talk about this with the group, but I'd like you to be thinking about conflicts that you managed effectively, where you showed some real competent communication. What conflicts could you potentially have managed a little bit better, a little bit more competence? And then in terms of your roles and responsibilities, what does your communication look like? What's your part in the story of your neighborhood group? You can answer any of those if you want to. You don't need to feel like you have to. And then what are you thinking about? Questions, thoughts, pushback, concerns? I saw your hand first, I'm jumping to you. Yes.
Okay,
yes,
I have
sorry.
2 thoughts going on there. I brought something up at our neighborhood association the other night, and everybody in the room said, yeah, great idea. And one person said, we're not doing that, and looked at me, and then turned his back, and then turned back and looked at me, and I said, you know what? You're a jerk. And you're being really rude, and people are going, not people, the women in the room are going, because it's every time a woman brings up something. And then I get a text message next day, did I do something wrong? And I said, yeah, you're an ass. Apology accepted.
Well, that's a lot of clarity, and I love
You
it.
didn't know what?
How about you, Sandy? What are you thinking about?
I was just thinking how helpful this has been just coming because we have a situation going on and to find out it's everywhere.
I mean, I'm sorry and you're welcome. I don't know what to say, but yes. Yeah.
Well, we're just not, since I've been there, I just have not seen it. I have not had this kind of conflict going on. We've always been on the same page, doing, like this is what we're here for, is unity and doing this and doing that and brainstorming and I'll donate this, we can do this and this. But this one individual has just quite recently.
I thought he lived in my neighborhood.
This is something that's going around.
I think they own property in both.
He's everywhere.
His name is Charlie.
I'm sending around, so these are just one more takeaway. When you think about communication, it's a lot, it's complex, just like conflict, right? So the principle of nonviolent communication can be a way to help us move into that confident communication, so.
Just aggressive in his
I had one other thing.
Yeah,
That
jump in.
every time you said I, to me, that's I,
Mhm.
and that just makes the hair on people's necks stand up.
It definitely, I get that, I think, and I definitely hear that sometimes. It depends again though, to me, on the context. If it's a situation where we're in a conflict situation, the goal is to take responsibility for our own roles. And so I think the I is appropriate in that kind of a context. But I agree with you that just generally, I don't love hearing people just talking about themselves and their own needs without, acknowledging anybody else. Stylistically, personally, that's how I feel.
I would say I've been the person who's said things like, oh, well, you did this and you made
Yeah.
me feel.
Yeah.
And so then when I would say, well, I feel this when this happens, and it feels a lot less
Mhm.
attacky and it's
Yeah.
not over a lot
It depends
better.
on what the situation is and what your goals are, candidly.
I love that, depends.
Sorry.
Yeah, legal people say, right? You always have to start with it depends.
No, this is like, I loved logic in college. That was my favorite kind of structure of argument, so probably has stuck with me. Other thoughts, questions?
Well, I have
Pushback?
had also, I mean, I'm sorry I'm talking too much, Madam President, but, for me, and I want to be on the same page with everyone, but I have noticed one of the quickest ways to get somebody defensive is say you this and you that.
Oh, yes.
Instead of how about
Sure.
can we, be an inclusive.
We is also a powerful word in communication. So, did that work, Peggy? Did that not work?
No, not for me.
It worked for you? Okay. This is just a little bit of feedback that it's helpful. We just try to get some feedback when we talk to groups so that we can tailor for organizations. So if you've got a chance to do this, that is swell. If you don't have a chance, that's okay too. And also we can send it out through Angela and CPO. But if you need resources, like any of this stuff, the TKI, any of these things, if your neighborhood group, if you decided, we're gonna take the TKI and we'll look at conflict styles as part of our meeting or something, I can send it to you.
That would be nice.
So let me know. Email me. I'm in Missouri State. Yes.
So should an organization or a neighborhood association need a mediator, what would you recommend?
So my colleague, Dr. Shar Bergquist, is great at this. She's very trained and steeped in experience in conflict and negotiation and mediation. Sometimes that is helpful. I can send you her information if anyone feels like that might be a need. I also know other mediators around. She's a really great one. She's connected to that community pretty powerfully. And she's really great. I mean, I would highly recommend her. I have a full-time teaching job, so I don't do that kind of thing, but I will happily try to refer you to people with that expert. Berquist, Berquist, and she's in the Missouri State system too, so if you search for her, you would get to her email. And she's retired, but she still answers your email. And if you search for me on our website, there aren't very many Noras, so I'm easy to find. You can always send me an email with any questions. And I explained this to David when I forgot. I can't get into my office right now because my building is totally shut down for asbestos mediation, and so I didn't have a name tag. And so I just thought, well, I'll just take a camp name tag instead of my Missouri State one. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.